Okay, I got a message from one of my subscribers. For a change, I'll give the name because it's a good question. MWG Cubs. He's a newer subscriber. He asked some questions about UFC matchmaking, particularly criticizes that they match up hot fighters against hot fighters, and how he thinks that some of the other matches, like if you could call it like Stephan Bonner's calling out Rampage Jackson or Matt Wyman calling out Roger Huerta, that they should probably let those matches happen. I'm going to comment, and also that one loss in the UFC sometimes will cut you out of the loop. I'm going to address the one loss in the UFC cuts you out of the loop thing, and saying that unfortunately casual fans respond to the undefeated fighter very, very much, even though I feel that sometimes an undefeated fighter just really hasn't fought anyone. Someone like until recently Roger Huerta, but he did beat Clay Guida. That gives him a pretty solid win, and there's rumors that he's going to be fighting another similarly strong opponent, possibly a Frankie Edgar. Actually a strong rumor. What I have to say that is, of course, if you lose your first fight in the UFC, I don't think you automatically should be kicked out. And a good example of this would be Charles Chainsaw McCarthy, who, of course, he was on Tough 4 and finally did get his comeback, but at UFC 53 made his debut against, I think it was 53 anyways, against David the Crow Loazo. He suffered, of course, that vicious spinning back fist, but he did very well. He won the first round against the Crow pretty easily. Not easily, but pretty convincingly. And he was let go after that, and I always found that odd, because that, in my opinion, was one of the fights of the night. And I mean, it certainly had one of the finishes. It probably had the finish of the night, minus maybe Justin Eiler's like completely wrecking his leg, getting knocked out by Arlovsky. But still, there's a lot of problems with the UFC matchmaking system, and that is they protect certain fighters and they don't protect other fighters. And you get that in boxing too. I mean, it's hardly unique to the UFC, and you had it a little bit in Pride, many people would say, with Gomi being protected, although Gomi eventually did, although it took a lot of whining to fight most of the top guys. I mean, he did fight the Kawajiris and the Ishidas of the world, but it would be somewhat true to state that Pride tried to protect him. UFC's done the same thing with their poster boys like Roger Huerta. I know I harp on Roger Huerta a lot, but if you look at the man's record in the UFC, truly, I think you'll see my point. In comparison to a guy like Guida or Tyson Griffin or Frankie Edgar, who have, I'm going to say, Tyson Griffin did fight David Lee in his debut, and Guida did get one easy one against Justin James, but both of those were debut fights. Every other fight has been the hard road, the where they should be fighting. And I don't think you necessarily have to be on a run to get a match with someone. You don't have to have 1, 3, 4, 5 fights in a row to get a high-profile fight. I think you do to get a title shot, and I think that's the way it is, and that's why I didn't like the fact that guys like Rampage Jackson got a title shot, and even Anderson Silva. They're very worthy champions, don't get me wrong. Both are probably top of the game at their weight classes, but they only had to win one fight to get the title shots, which was, and Rampage's was against Marvin Eastman, so I mean, that I was found a bit weird. Well, not weird, but dissatisfactory. The bottom line for the UFC is, of course, they want to make money. They'll make the matches that make the most money. They'll make the matches that make the most money for the least cost, too, I find. Basically, I mean, what they're trying to do is they're trying to make the most money, which means they want to make a match that sells the most tickets without having to pay a lot of money shelling it out. Now, it would be fair to make the statement that very few fighters in the UFC really make the money that really tips the scales against them. Maybe a guy like Chuck Liddell, but of course Chuck Liddell's a massive draw. Fortunately, we have to live with the fact the UFC is run like a business, and we basically have to accept that somewhat. We have to realize that every match they make is going to have at least some business motivation. It's not about love of the sport or anything like that. And you won't get that in any combat sport, I don't think, except for maybe the K1 Grand Prix. Like, Chuck Liddell, for the longest time, didn't fight Vanderlei Silva. Even though I think Chuck realistically did want it, I don't think the UFC wanted it. They tried to do their best to weasel their way out of it when the idea came up, and they finally made the match now because they want the big draw, and Chuck's on his way out. So they finally decided, hey, let's make the Vanderlei Silva Chuck Liddell match. They haven't hyped it nearly as much as they should. I mean, you got the Pride library, have Vanderlei Silva's knockout, so I guess Rampage is the only really, and Hendo are the ones that are really known to the UFC fans. Replay that a lot, but that's all for this one. I don't really have a lot to say on this issue. The way I would make fights is not exactly the business way of making fights, and the UFC is a business ultimately. So I hope that was helpful. I don't know if it was, but that's all I got to say on the matter.